Are you dreading increasingly shorter days and longer nights? Do cold, overcast northwest winters bum you out? You may be suffering from the big dark, but there is a solution. I'm Dyer Oxley, telling you to talk to your podcast app about Meet Me Here, KUOW's arts podcast, a weekly dose of events and culture to lighten up your life. Side effects of Meet Me Here include laughter, curiosity, and inspiration. Find Meet Me Here on your local KUOW app or wherever you get your podcast.
20 years ago, buying a house in Seattle felt like a stretch. Today, it feels like you need to win the lottery. A two-bedroom home that cost $400,000 back then, now it's pushing $1 million.
Homeownership is slipping out of reach for a lot of people, especially those with modest incomes. But there's a movement underway in Washington state, one that could bring housing costs back within reach.
Except there's a catch. You're gonna have to downsize.
The dimensions of my tiny home are 16 by 9, so it's 144 square feet.
I've got a full-size closet, not something you see in a lot of tiny houses, so it works pretty well.
It's amazing, but that doesn't mean there aren't problems with it. We have to make do with what we have as far as space goes.
From KUOW in Seattle, this is Booming. I'm Joshua McNichols.
And I'm Monica Nicholsberg. Washington state legislators want to make it legal to live in an RV in someone else's backyard or driveway year-round.
Today, could letting people live in tiny houses on wheels on someone else's property actually reduce our state's housing shortage? And could it be a solution for you? That's coming up.
And do you, Audrey Lustig Safronic, and you, Paul Norris Safronic, understand that of your own free will you will undergo the permanent and irreversible medical procedure commonly known as downsizing, and that following the procedure, your bodies will be approximately 0.0364% of their current mass and volume?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Paul, I need a yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Great, thank you.
So, Joshua, I know a big part of your beat is figuring out how people are dealing with the wild cost of housing in our region. We did an episode on how starter homes are going extinct, and you've covered the rise of co-housing here. And now I know you're focused on this idea of making RVs and tiny homes on wheels permanent housing.
Yeah.
This is something I experimented with temporarily in my 20s. My husband and I traveled and lived in our camper van for weeks at a time, but we never planned to make it permanent. So what is it that makes the tiny homes that you're talking about different than, say, just living out of a van for some part of the year?
Well, these are bigger than a van, but they're smaller than what you'd see in a mobile home park. So, small, but big enough to include sofas, bathrooms with showers, little kitchenettes, and a sleeping loft with a queen-size bed.
For the record, our van did have a queen-size bed, but you could not fit a lot of other stuff in there.
Right. And right now, Washington state lawmakers are trying to make it legal to live in them year-round as a way to partially address the high cost of home ownership and our housing shortage. They got a bill halfway through the legislature last year, but they ran out of time to complete the work. So this year they're picking up where they left off.
I am surprised to hear that they weren't already legal. I feel like I see these all over the place.
Yeah, people are doing it already, but when they do, they're taking a risk. If a neighbor complains, you could be forced to leave. That's why people tend to hide out in the country, renting a spot in someone's field or something. Or they try to squeeze into mobile home parks. That's one of the few places where they're allowed. Also, some cities have bans on them, but they just don't enforce them. But, all that uncertainty discourages people from investing in these homes. And State Representative Mia Gregerson wants to change that.
Right now, we're scared. I'm scared. I don't want to break the law. So if you were to try to prepare for your mother or mother-in-law to come and live with you for a few months while you are on maternity leave for a little bit of extra help, can you legally and safely set something up for them to have their own space? And that's what we're missing right now.
Her bill, which is House Bill 1443, would make it legal to park an RV or a tiny home on wheels on private property in urban areas and live in them year-round, as long as they have proper utility hookups.
A lot of times I'll see these RVs gathered in vacant lots. It sounds like that's illegal. Would this bill address that?
No, this bill does not allow parking on vacant lots, even if they're privately owned. It also doesn't allow these tiny homes in parks or on the side of the road. It's about parking them in a spot on a residential lot where there's already a main house. The homeowner is sort of a gatekeeper who decides whether to allow this.
Okay, so this sounds like an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, or a backyard cottage, which I thought were already legal.
Yeah, they are. But the big difference is the new bill only covers homes that are on wheels, and they're much cheaper and smaller. I talked to this guy, Cole Peterson, in Portland. These homes are already legal there. He runs a business called Tiny Hookups.
Tiny Hookups.
Yeah. It sounds kind of like a trashy reality TV show, right?
Yes, it kind of does.
But this is about utility hookups, not the other kind.
Got it.
He says you have to think about the cost of a backyard cottage compared to a tiny home like this.
You can make the decision that you want to have one of these on your properties and have it there, livable, in a month. An ADU would take a year and a half and incidentally cost $300,000 to $400,000, whereas these are going to cost like $50,000. It is absolutely by far the least expensive, the easiest, the cheapest, and the quickest form of housing that is possible in the United States.
So, tiny homes on wheels are a lot cheaper than some other options, but they're not legal now. And we know that there's demand for them because people are already putting them in places where they're technically not allowed. And now there's this movement to make it legal to put these in people's backyards.
Right.
So we heard the idea of like a pregnant mom letting her mother move in to help. I have a neighbor who actually did just that when she had a baby. Her mom came out in a little casita trailer.
Oh, cute.
I'm also thinking about maybe a nanny or another type of caregiver caring for an elderly relative or something like that.
Yeah, or like an adult child, maybe they need some time to get on their feet before they get their own place.
Yeah, it's happening a lot more often these days.
Yeah, or maybe a friend who's in some financial trouble, And we shouldn't forget that this helps the homeowners too. They can earn extra money by renting out part of their property.
So I get that these are cheaper to build, but $50,000 is still a serious investment for a lot of people. It's not necessarily something you would just have on hand.
Yeah. I mean, $30,000 would get you a comfortable RV. $50,000 would get you a nicer one or maybe a used tiny house on wheels that maybe needs a new roof. A lot of people pay more like $100,000 for a new custom-built tiny home on wheels. These are kind of an upgrade from an RV. They look more like a little house that you just pull behind a truck. And on top of that, you pay rent for the land that you're occupying.
Okay, so $100,000 plus rent. I mean, is this really an affordable option for middle-income people?
Well, yes, if the goal is home ownership, I mean, you can take out a loan to buy these, and loan payments on a $100,000 house are much smaller than on a $600,000 condo. And often it's also far cheaper than renting, even with the loan payments. I talked to two people who live in tiny homes on wheels, and both of them are saving a lot of money now on housing costs. Amelia Kaiser is one of them. She bought a used tiny home on wheels for $50,000 in cash. She and her husband were downsizing from a traditional home.
And rather than having, give or take, $3,000 mortgage plus utilities and upkeep on a traditional home, we are paying around $1,100 a month all in for our housing costs.
Now she lives in a country setting just south of Bellingham. And John Early used to rent, and now he lives in a tiny home on wheels in Tacoma's Hilltop neighborhood.
I pay $800 a month in rent just for the space, and that includes all my utilities. And then with my mortgage, the house was $103,000. I put a large down payment down, and then I pay right around $800 for my mortgage. So combined, I'm paying $1,600 plus internet and phone.
Definitely less than renting most Seattle apartments, and you get to own your home. But it also sounds like this is kind of a big lifestyle change. You obviously can't bring all your stuff with you if you're downsizing into a tiny home.
Yeah, and lots of people talked about this, the difficulty of downsizing. Rebecca Rocha of Seattle is buying a tiny home right now. She runs a YouTube channel called Frugal Latina. For her, this is the only realistic path to homeownership. She set herself a budget of $85,000, and a family member helped her with a down payment. She ordered her home, and now she's waiting for it to arrive. In the meantime, she's been downsizing a lot.
And truthfully, it has been a weird feeling of grief and exhilaration. I am not a minimalist. As someone who has made it out the mud, who has made it out of low-income housing, sometimes those items that you get, even just furniture, feel so precious when you have gone without. One of the things, it's a small thing, was selling my vanity mirror. It's very silly, and it's like one of the girliest things I owned. I thought to myself, I'll take a home over this vanity table.
We have such a complicated relationship with Steph, and I love that you can really hear that in her voice. You know, a lot of people just wouldn't fit in a tiny house. If I had to move into one with my 2 boys and dog and husband, I would lose my marbles. But you mentioned earlier, the idea behind the law is to help address the high cost of housing. So how does this help those of us who just can't live that way?
Well, it's about supply. Every legal place for someone to live takes pressure off the housing market. It's one less household competing for an apartment or a starter home. And when demand eases off, even just a little bit, that can ripple out into lower prices and rents for everyone.
Okay, but still, it is a very specific type of housing. If this bill were passed, do you really think that it could meaningfully ease the housing shortage?
Yeah, like how much can this scale, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did a little back-of-the-napkin math on this. State officials say Washington needs to build 55,000 homes a year on average to keep up with our population growth here. But we're falling short. We're only producing a little more than half that. And legalizing these tiny homes on wheels could bring in another 12,000 homes a year. So it doesn't bring us up to our goal, but it could get us a lot closer. I'm basing my estimate on how much money people spent building ADUs in 2024, and I'm assuming people would spend the same amount on tiny homes on wheels. It's very rough math. Nobody really knows how many people will do this, but it's intuitive. You can buy a lot more tiny homes for the same money you'd spend on larger houses.
You've talked about in the past how we need a whole ladder of housing options, and this sounds like it could add a rung to the ladder that's closer to the ground, that's easier for some people to grab onto. But this is Seattle. A lot of people are really attached to the character of their single-family neighborhoods. And when there's any kind of change like this, they worry about a bunch of more people coming in and taking up parking, or maybe even just, I would imagine, the look of an RV being parked in the driveway every few houses. Is that something you're hearing about?
Well, in the hearings I've seen for this bill, I'm not seeing neighbors coming out with pitchforks, worried about like RVs in every driveway or anything. But, when lawmakers tried to pass it last year, they did face opposition from the Association of Washington Cities. Their lobbyist, Carl Schrader, testified against the bill. He says a lot of people were calling it the Cousin Eddie bill.
You've lost me. Who is Cousin Eddie?
Well, he's a character from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
Okay, I have not seen it.
Well, it's about this suburban family called the Griswolds, and they're trying to have a perfect Christmas. Then Cousin Eddie rolls up in his beat-up RV with his rowdy kids and a big stinky dog.
So, when did you get the tenement on wheels?
Oh, that's an RV.
He's kind of a character who doesn't really care about the folks around him and how his behavior affects other people. His RV is kind of a symbol of that as it's kind of rattling along and parked in the front.
There's a scene where the dad is watching Cousin Eddie in the driveway through a window.
What are you looking at?
Oh, the silent majesty of a winter's morn, the clean, cool chill of the holiday air, and an asshole in his bathrobe emptying a chemical toilet into my sewer.
Clark, please. He doesn't know any better.
He ought to know it's illegal. It's a storm sewer. If it fills with gas, I pity the person who lights a match within 10 yards of it.
And I guess this would be a spoiler, but is there an explosion?
Yes, there's an old guy who lights a cigar, Don't drop that! It's a funny reference, but it conveys real concerns. The worries that these RVs aren't well built, cities worry about strain on existing utilities, and they worry about how sewage gets handled.
And what do the supporters of this bill say to that?
Well, they have a rebuttal. I talked to Katie Gould, who works for Sightline. That's a think tank that pushes for affordable housing.
I actually watched National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation over the holidays so I could get fresh up on my Cousin Eddie references for this bill. When these dwellings are illegal, you're not having someone from the city come inspect your utilities to make sure it's hooked up right. You're getting people who are asking their friends, some maybe handyman that they know, to come check it out. They're trying to do this under their radar. They're hoping their neighbors don't file a complaint. By bringing these people kind of into the fold and saying, hey, this is okay, you can actually invest in the utility hookups. You can invest in a nicer dwelling than you would have otherwise, and you're not going to be dumping sewage into this street.
In other words, legislation would mean fewer Cousin Eddie problems. That's what she says. The bill would require proper underground sewer connections and a water supply that won't freeze in the winter and dedicated power circuits. You have to hook the tiny home's utilities to the property owner's existing lines. And that can mean, digging a trench or installing a tiny circuit panel outside. These things cost $10,000 to $15,000 on average. People have to invest in doing it right.
So it sounds like this is kind of an innovative way to bring a lot more housing onto the market quickly. But there's a balance, right? Because the way that they're doing that is by lightening up on some of the regulations that make it hard to build housing.
Yeah, exactly. And it is important to know that these are regulated. They're not built to regular building code standards. They're not like a house with big, thick walls with tons of insulation. But they do have to meet RV standards set by the state. These are just easier to meet.
Right. We mentioned earlier that some people already live this way. How are they reacting to this law, which would potentially require more of them, like utility hookup inspections, for example?
Well, most tell me that they're tired of living under the radar. John Early, the guy in Tacoma, told me it will let people come out from the shadows.
I'm really hopeful for this bill to pass, too, because we are in an area of beg for forgiveness rather than ask for permission. So, yes, regulate us, give us a path to do this 100% above board, by the books. Just create the legislation that says, okay, under circumstances X, Y, and Z, we deem this a safe unit to be there.
It sounds like there's a lot of will to make this happen. Do you think that the bill will pass, that it'll become law?
Well, it's hard to predict. I mean, the backers are very confident that it'll get through the state legislature this year. But the Association of Washington Cities carries a lot of political weight. They're worried about the strain on utilities and the quality of these homes. And a lot of lawmakers will take their concerns seriously. In the end, the big question is whether they see Cousin Eddie as a nuisance or a neighbor.
Well, thanks for filling us in.
Yeah, no problem. That's it for Booming. Thanks for listening.
If you have been laid off by a tech company in the past couple of years, we want to hear from you. We're working on a story about where all of the laid-off tech workers have ended up. So shoot us an email at booming@kuow.org or leave us a voicemail at 206-221-7158, and you might be featured in a future episode.
Also, if you have been donating to the show, thank you so much. This kind of public radio service and this podcast are supported by the community, so we are really grateful when you can step up. If you want to donate, go to kuow.org/booming.
Our producers are Lucy Suchek and Alec Cowan. Our editor is Carol Smith. I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
I'm Joshua McNichols, and we'll see you next time.
I'm a firm believer that nature is healing. In these chaotic times, I invite you to take a breath and reconnect with our natural world. Wow, right in front of us. I'm Chris Morgan. Join me on The Wild as we explore stories of hope and resilience in nature. We'll bring you up close to some extraordinary species and learn how they are finding ways to adapt and thrive in fast-changing environments. Listen to The Wild on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.